Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the former news director here at GNAT-TV's News Project. But it's great to be back. It's Tuesday, June 3rd, and also a real pleasure to be joined by three of our local state representatives. We're starting a series of conversations with our local representatives. We'll be having three altogether if everything works out. We'll see how that happens. But anyway, today we're really pleased to be joined by Dave Durfee, who is the state representative from the Bennington 3 district. That includes the towns of Shaftesbury, part of Sunderland, and most importantly, Glastonbury, right?
Correct.
Did I pronounce that correctly, or is it Glastonbury?
I think that Glastonbury is the preferred pronunciation.
That's okay. That's what I thought, but just wanted to make sure. Also great to have with us today Sandy Pinsonault, who, when she's not being the town clerk of Dorset, is the representative for the Bennington-Rutland 1 district. That includes the towns of Dorset, Mount Tabor, Danby, Peru, and Landgrove. Sandy, welcome back.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. And also joining us is Chris Morrow, who is the representative from the Wyndham-Windsor Bennington district. That includes the towns of Weston, Londonderry, Winhall, and Andover. Well, folks, thank you all very much for being here, for making the time for this conversation. We're going to try and do, I guess, sort of a summing up or a wrap-up of how things went in the legislative session that sort of, but not quite ended on last Friday, May 31st. You will all be heading back up to Montpelier, I believe, on June 16th for at least a day or two to kind of finish up some business. And I guess the major bill that you'll then be talking about when you all get back up to Montpelier will be the education overhaul or reform bill, whatever the proper title is. So I thought we could maybe start there just to kind of get a sense as to where that all stands. I mean, that was a complicated piece of legislation that went back and forth between the House and the Senate, and you had a conference committee on that bill, but the conference committee wasn't able to iron out or find consensus around that. But I guess I just wondered, Dave, perhaps you could get us started here on this. What are the issues that you believe are still outstanding that are preventing the legislature from having a vote on this bill and presumably getting it over to the governor's office?
Yeah, the conference committee is technically still meeting. I don't know whether they are meeting today or met yesterday even. Public information, I just haven't looked at the schedule myself. But we were all of us except for the members of the conference committee were told, go on home. We'll continue to plug away at this for the next 2 weeks. So presumably that's what's happening, and whether they're meeting formally or having conversations offline, I'm not sure. We will go back in 2 weeks. If they have something for us to work on, we'll hopefully all be in agreement. And if not, then we'll go back to square one or square 1A or something. And ultimately, interestingly, the Committee of Conference, if it's not able to get its work done, our rules, the joint rules, give the House and the Senate the option to appoint new conference members. So, not suggesting that we're anywhere near that point yet, but I know the governor has been pretty consistent about saying that he will force the legislature to continue to meet until something's passed. And the governor doesn't necessarily actually have the authority to force us to continue to meet, but he can put pressure on, and he can call us back, and I guess continue to call us back. So I would guess that there's been a fairly broad consensus for some time that we need to do something, and we're not going to get the opportunity that we have now. We've gotten this close. So I imagine that at some point there will be a bill that we're able to all not necessarily 100% agree on, but that will be good to go with. Yeah, what are the differences right now? The House and the Senate bill the Senate bill didn't actually get very far, and they ended up adopting at the last minute something that looked like the House bill, but with some big exceptions. One of them is actually really relevant to our towns, our districts, because it deals with the towns that don't operate schools, so non-operating districts, and what kinds of independent schools will qualify for the funding that the state provides to those towns and to students. So I think everyone agrees, everyone across the state agrees that the traditional academies like BBA, there are 4 of them around the state, those have served for decades, longer than decades, perhaps centuries plural, as the de facto schools for the towns that they serve. And I'm confident that those will ultimately continue to be part of the mix. What's less clear is whether smaller independent schools that may serve primarily serve as private schools essentially, but also take a few, or maybe more than a few, public school students, whether they'll get the state funding. So right now, I think that's a big difference. That's one point of distinction between the two. Also, what the districts will look like and who's going to decide and by when they're going to decide. I think that's an outstanding issue. There are more, and I will stop now and say that I am not a member of the Committee of Conference. I'm not on the Education Committee, so I don't have the level of detail that some other folks might. The one thing that I know that has been a point of agreement is switching to a foundation formula. And that means basically that the state says, here's how much you're going to get for every student that you have in town, in the school. And you can spend it however you want, but this is all you're getting. And the House version has put some limitations on that, saying not exactly however you want. You can only have class sizes up to a certain point or down to a certain point. You can only have school buildings that are a certain size, and then they can't be any smaller than that. And I think the Senate has been saying, we'll have a foundation formula, here's what you get, and you can figure out what the class sizes should be. And there's probably not a lot of, ultimately at the end of the day, going to be a lot of difference in reality on what that would look like, but that is a difference. I'll just close by saying, as far as the foundation formula goes, there are districts in the state that spend twice as much as other districts. And some of the lower spending districts are actually here in southwestern Vermont. So the Bennington area, the schools that serve Bennington, Shaftesbury, part of my district, historically have been very low spending districts. Slate Valley, which serves west of Rutland, similarly has spent much less than other communities. And then there are towns that have spent a whole lot more. So let's say there's a difference of 2 to 1, I think at least. And the foundation formula would bring everybody closer to ultimately spending the same amount per student, which means that the amount that people are taxed would also sort of move from 2 different extremes into something more similar. And that's likely to mean in some cases, and I'm looking at this carefully because Shaftesbury is one of those towns that may be told, here, we're going to give you more resources because we think that everybody should be spending more to properly educate their students, but that there may be a higher tax rate to go with that. Think back to when we started having this conversation a year ago, it was because taxes were going up. So if the solution involves higher taxes for some communities, that may be a challenge to pull that off.
So districts that are currently spending less than what the foundation formula, which I believe is around $15,000 per student or something like that in the House version, would see a higher tax rate then.
Possibly, yeah.
And high spending districts would see a tax decrease.
Well, lower rate, yeah. And I'll say that there are lots, that's the beginning of the analysis, and there's a lot more to it, including the fact that we pay and would continue to pay, many of us, based on our income rather than property value. So.
Well, Chris, Sandy, what are you hearing from the folks up in your districts? What their take is on this? Does it sound like this sounds like a good way to go, an improvement over what we have now, or is this filled with problematic bits and pieces.
I think the foundation formula is the great way to go. There's 48 other states that are currently using it in different areas, and I think it's a more fair and equitable based on student population versus property tax equity.
Okay. Chris?
People up on the mountain are concerned about how the sending town tuitioning portion of this shakes out. Obviously, we have Burton, but people are also attending Long Trail and Stratton Mountain School, and then there's Winhall Mountain School, so that is the main point of interest, I think. And then there's something that we haven't touched on, which was the Ways and Means Committee in the House split up the home. Now we have homestead and non-homestead tax rates, and so they decided to split up the non-homestead into a few categories, including second homes and rental units and a few other categories, to give us, the state, more flexibility in how it taxes. The Senate, I think, took those out, and so that's something that I'll be looking at to see how that shakes out, because that's definitely a point of interest.
Because the second home piece, I guess, was seen as another potential revenue source, right?
Correct.
That they could be taxed at a higher rate, I guess, and other non-homestead would be what, commercial properties and businesses and that sort of thing.
Right, and
Rentals
for apartments. Structurally it makes sense to give us more flexibility, and a camp is not the same thing as a business, which is not the same thing as an apartment building, and they're all lumped together now. So I think it makes sense to give us more flexibility going forward, but a lot, depends on the details.
I guess at the end of the day, I suppose the critical factor is is this new structure going to save taxpayers money? I mean, I guess that was kind of a large part of the motivation. I mean, not to say that, the educational outcomes that we want to see for the kids in school, we want that to be better than they were before or whatever, but I mean, the key drivers seem to have been, the tax issues from last year when a lot of folks saw double-digit property tax increases, and that was unacceptable, and the voters spoke in November. I mean, has this bill got a chance of getting through if at the end of the day it doesn't wind up costing less than what we're spending now?
I think the trick in having it pass will be what each individual district, how each district is affected. There's a several-year phase-in period, and at this point I think that nobody is suggesting that in year one or immediately that tax rates will go down, that spending will go down, but it is designed, and I think would end up slowing the rate of growth and basically keeping it at the rate of inflation. So the foundation formula is a way of saying this is what's being spent, and the state is deciding that, and then it would grow as inflation grows, as the economy grows. But unlike the current system, where spending has exceeded inflation, even with the high inflation rates that we've experienced over the past several years, because school districts themselves decide what the spending is going to be, and then they send the bill to the state under our current system. So that would be, I mean, anybody looking at that would say, well, you would think that's going to probably grow faster than inflation. So, and that's what's happened.
Is there, and before we leave this, and I know we could probably spend the entire show today talking about the ins and outs of the education bill, but is it an option, do you think, to just sort of hit the pause button on the whole thing and say, this is really complicated, this is really important, we need to get this right, we can't rush it through? The governor, I know, is very eager to sign the bill, but might it be an option to kind of just say, why don't we wait a few more months and have a committee review this and come back next January and be good to go?
I don't think that's a possibility. I think they've been studying this. I mean, we've already had 39 studies since Act 60 went into place. I don't think another study is feasible at this point. I think we can't keep kicking the can down the road. We've got to make some decisions, as tough as those are going to be, and get the education formula going forward.
just to circle back to the tax issue for a second, just important to note that we did buy down the tax rate for this coming year to be about, on average statewide, 1.1% of an increase over last year. Of course, that's an average, so it's going to vary greatly depending on your town. So that was to stabilize things for us to do this work. And then on the big bill, you know, no one's saying this is going to lower our taxes going forward, unfortunately. This is, as Dave said, this is going to bend the cost curve is the phrase. So it's going to lessen the increase that we otherwise would have seen going forward. So it's just, we need to be clear about expectations.
I've heard the same thing, that the first year will be the rough year, but then after that, it'll start stabilizing and go, you know, continue to go down a little bit each time.
Well, it certainly will be interesting to see how these districts get redrawn. I mean, that's another whole piece that, again, we could spend half an hour talking about. But let's leave it there for now and move on to some of the other things that you also, because you also did other stuff besides education over the last 5 months or so. And one of the bills I was kind of intrigued by was this housing bill, or S-127, the CHIP bill, I guess. And forgive me for not being up on what that acronym stands for. I'm sure the H is for housing, but it sounds like a fairly interesting bill to try and stimulate more housing development around the state. And I guess the part that kind of intrigued me the most was the idea that the TIF, or tax incentive financing,
Increment.
Tax increment financing, thank you, which I know was a part of the Putnam Block project in Bennington, to finance that, where basically it sounds like you borrow from the future to help get projects off the ground, and then the higher value of a property that's developed pays for that early startup. So I guess I just wondered, how will this work? Is this designed to? And we've all heard so much about how there's a shortage of affordable and workforce housing around the state, not just here in our area, but really statewide. Is this intended to kind of, give developers another reason to kind of, pencil a project out? Is that the plan?
Yeah, well, it's really focused more on infrastructure and municipalities, the way I understand it. So the borrower, it could be a municipality or a developer in this case, but it's focused on extending water, sewer, other utilities to an area that could support a housing project and getting that financed so that the housing can get built. And it's kind of arcane how it works, but it has the potential to spur a lot of housing, I think, across the state. More in medium-sized towns and larger towns than the really small towns, but we need it everywhere and at every level. So it is focused on affordable and mixed income housing, and there's a lot in there in the CHIPS part of the bill. But there's also other elements to the bill besides CHIP, which got all the press and all what we were fighting about. But there's another loan program about infrastructure with the Vermont Bond Bank, which is going to have more flexibility with the smaller towns. And there's other things in there as well. So I think it's a good bill. And
Well, housing is certainly a problem around the state, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, I voted against it when it first came out from the House and before it went to the Senate because it didn't help rural areas. It was all about the big cities. And I felt that we need more housing, not just in Burlington and Rutland or Bennington. We need it everywhere. So for that reason, I was against it, and it didn't include the CHIP. So when it came back from the Senate the second time, it included the CHIP. It had included all rural areas throughout the state of Vermont. So therefore, I felt it was a much better bill, and so I voted in favor of it the second time around. And there was a cap on how much could be borrowed each year, and that was at $40 million, and that wouldn't have allowed for much growth, where they now cap it at $200 million. So there's a lot more potential to have a lot more housing and infrastructure built. So that's why, so it helped a lot.
oh, all right. Well, we certainly need all the help we can get on the housing front, right?
That's right.
It seems like, anyway. So moving on, there was another issue that came up during the session, which I have to confess blindsided me a little bit because there was so much attention being paid to the education overhaul, but that's the whole question around healthcare, health insurance, and the financial problems that I guess the state's one major health insurance company, Blue Cross Blue Shield, is having. I guess they are, well, not exactly bankrupt yet, but
Close.
knocking on the door. What is going on here? I guess I wondered if, could any of you explain kind of how did we get here? I mean, was it just a case of, healthcare costs in Vermont are so much higher than in other places, and hospitals and health insurance companies were charging more? But what is going on here?
I don't have a great answer to that question, other than to say that in the same way that we've come to the understanding, I think, that our demographics, our population maybe, and population density can't support the level of spending on education that we've gotten to at this point, that the same may be true of healthcare. And we've got nonprofit hospitals. These across the state, we've got 14 hospitals, and none of them are owned by companies, businesses with a profit motive. They're all nonprofit. They're all regulated by the state, by the Green Mountain Care Board, as are the insurance companies. And yet we find ourselves as consumers, as consumers of healthcare, spending more on insurance than I think practically anybody, by a considerable amount. And ultimately, I think it comes down to what level of service are we able to afford. We all want the best for healthcare. We're an aging state, which has obvious implications. We spend more on treating folks as they get older than when they're younger. So I think that Blue Cross's situation came as a bit of a surprise, at least to many of us. And we passed a couple of bills towards the end of the session that try and work at some of the ways that we can make changes. We don't necessarily have a lot of control over much of the market because there are federal regulations as well. We're in an area, I think, here where we have access to a good hospital, and we're all grateful for that. That's not necessarily the case for many people in the state, and they don't want to lose what they do have.
And is it a situation we're looking at that potentially other hospitals elsewhere around the state might have to close? Or, I mean, I know there's been talk about that. But are there any that just really are feeling like, oh my God, we don't get through this stretch, we're going to have to shut down completely, or maybe stop providing certain kinds of services?
That's what they're going to do. I think you're going to see hospitals start limiting what services they offer, and you'll have to go further away to get that particular service that you might be looking for. It's more like a catch-22, where an aging population, our largest population in Vermont is over 65. So so their elderly care, it costs more than your annual good health check. So
there's two other elements to this. This goes back to the Dean administration when we mandated that health insurance companies covered a wider array of services, which was great on one level, but also a lot of insurance companies left the state after that, right? So our competition has diminished, and we're seeing the result of that now. The other thing is, by far our largest healthcare provider is UVM Medical Center, right? And that's about 60% of what we spend in the state on healthcare costs. And they're not the most efficient of hospitals. There's a lot of debate about this going on, but they spend a lot on administrative costs and executive pay and other non-direct service costs. And so that, with 60% of the healthcare costs, they drive a lot of the numbers on insurance rates and other issues. we did in one of our bills, we gave the Green Mountain Care Board more authority. We actually stipulated they had authority to regulate the hospitals more tightly, and they haven't been doing it, and we switched a may to a shall in a few instances, so that now they are actually going to be obligated to regulate the hospitals more closely, and that, I think, is going to be good.
And then they have to report what they find.
Yeah, and we're going to be getting more data. And the other bill we passed related to healthcare, which was also somewhat arcane, was this 340B pharmaceuticals bill, which is the hospitals had asked for. It's basically they're allowed to sell pharmaceuticals in-house, and that was a profit center for them. But we capped the level at what they can charge patients, because there was widespread disparity and abuse in the system in terms of what hospitals were charging for various pharmaceuticals. And so I think that also is a good bill that will have potential to lower costs going forward.
And I'm just wondering, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, on the federal level, the budget bill that's being considered in Congress, that, you know, a lot of conversation about cutting back Medicaid expenses. Would that fall into this somehow or another? I mean, it seems like on the surface that is going to add another level of problem.
And it's a different, it's a different segment of the population, different insured segment. Medicaid patients are not part of, you know, Blue Cross, or they're not, you know, looking to Blue Cross for their insurance. So when they are no longer covered by Medicaid, if that happens, and if the state isn't able to pick up that, you know, the difference in the funding, then they would presumably go onto the market, and that's another challenge, by the way, federally. The subsidies that originally came in under the ACA and were extended twice are set to expire at the end of the year. So lots of Vermonters who currently get lots of middle-income Vermonters who currently get a subsidy will lose that and will be in shock when they see their rates in November when they come out.
Me included.
Yeah.
Well, certainly more to come there. A couple of other things I wanted to ask you all about, but before we get too far down the trail here, I thought maybe this might be a good point to just sort of stop and have us go around the table and have each of you talk about some of the highlights of the work that you all did in your different committees, because each of you were on different committees. And Dave, maybe I'll start with you, since you there was an article in today's issue of E.T. Digger about agricultural runoff. Is that something your committee was working on this year, and if not, then we can pass and you can just talk about whatever else went on, and then Sandy and Chris, you can tell us about what were some of the highlights of the year in your committees. But I was just curious about that, because I know that the runoff issue has been around for a while, but is there some bill pending that's going to remediate that?
There is a bill that we passed. I think the Senate passed it on Friday, maybe a day earlier, that has been working its way slowly through the legislature since the beginning of the year. This is a long-running debate. Might be the right word, but the state is required to enforce the Clean Water Act. The federal government has told the state that they would let the state enforce it, and the Clean Water Act relates to lots of different things that relate to water, and one of them is farm runoff. So when it rains and the rain goes into farm fields or into where animals cows specifically are living, and if it takes cow manure and other fertilizers and pesticides off of the property and into streams, it ends up in a lake somewhere or in a river. We don't necessarily live day to day hearing about Lake Champlain here, but up in much of the state, what used to be a lake that you could count on swimming in, whenever you wanted, that's no longer the case. So the EPA last fall came to the state and said, you're not doing what we had all agreed that you were going to be doing. And this legislation that we passed at the very end of the year is designed to address that. And it essentially puts more enforcement authority in the hands of one agency and takes that same authority away from another agency. So there's a little bit of conflict there. Deciding exactly how much of that authority to shift was a major part of the discussions in the Senate. And by the time we got the bill, it was pretty much, I think, in a good place. We did make some changes at the last minute that shifted a little more of that authority. And the Senate passed it. I believe the governor will sign it. And I think that the EPA will be satisfied with what happened. The sort of happening at the same time, of course, we know is that the EPA of today is a little different from the EPA of even 12 months ago. And with cuts there in staffing and changes in their priorities, there was, I think, sort of a feeling that we should probably lock this into Vermont statute now before the EPA came back and said, actually, we don't care what you do to Lake Champlain. So.
Okay. I should have mentioned, as the chair of the Agriculture Committee, I'm sure this has been an interesting topic for you all and your colleagues to talk about.
Yes.
Well, all right, Sandy, you were on the committee for veterans and
Government operations and military
right?
affairs.
So, what were some of the major stories of this year?
We did a lot of charter changes for different communities, minor changes with how they elect different officials in their town, or changing their annual meeting dates and stuff like that. So those are pretty simple. We did work on the open meeting law, and we attached a bill that was presented to us from a representative from Chittenden County, or Chittenden, the town of Chittenden, regarding obstruction of meetings, select board meetings or school board meetings with different constituents coming in and constantly disrupting. So we passed a stricter law, or added it that they can't, that you're out of there. No more stopping the meetings and having people have to wait and have a sheriff on duty all the time. So we stopped that. So that was a good law. And then as far as the military affairs bill, we finally got a veterans exemption on military retirement pension. Not what we were looking for, but it's certainly a start in the right direction. And so we're pleased with that. And I believe the governor has signed off on that one as well. So
that would give veterans a tax exemption or a tax break?
If you have a retired pension, which means you've served 30 or 20 years or more in the military, you get a retirement pay. And Vermont was one of 3 states that still had not given any type of retirement benefit on income tax cut. So we had asked for 100%. It came back that you get 100% up to $125,000 household income. And then after that, it goes back until a max of $135,000. And what they also did do, which I'm not sure how many other states might do this, but any veteran, regardless of how many years of service, and retired with an honorable discharge, or not retired, exited the military with an honorable discharge, will get a $250 check if they earn less than $25,000. So it's certainly helping our homeless veterans and those living off from just Social Security, that type of thing. So they'll get a $250 check each year, up to, and then re-increment up to $35,000. It goes down just a little bit based on a percentage of income. So that will help a large contingency of our veterans. And that's a big stipulation, is people think every veteran's a retired veteran, and they're not. There's veterans who only served 4, 6, 8, 12, whatever years, and then there's retired veterans who served 20 or more years. Those are considered retired, and they get the pension.
Oh, all right, okay.
Yeah.
And Chris, you were on the Energy and Digital Services Committee. I'm probably
Digital infrastructure.
Okay.
Yeah, our committee was new this year. It had been in existence previous biennium, but last biennium it wasn't. And so we have a new chair, our local rep, Kathleen James, and 4 freshman members of a 9-member committee. So we spent a lot of time taking foundational testimony, learning about our energy sector and our IT sector. The state IT hasn't been overseen very robustly, to say the least, by the legislature for a long time, and it's much needed. So that was just something that needed to happen, and we're starting that process. We did get one bill to get better reporting from the Agency of Digital Services, which is the agency that's responsible for coordinating and kind of regulating and rationalizing IT across all the state agencies, because before you had all the different departments doing different things, and it was expensive and chaotic. And so we have a ways to go on that front, but it's going in the right direction. On the energy side, really we were expecting to get some things from the Senate, which never ended up coming over. But the one bill we did work on was, and got passed, was just a small bill to allow solar arrays up to 25 kilowatts to get expedited permitting through the Public Utility Commission. Before, it was 15 kilowatts. And that was just because the technology on solar panels has increased so much that basically it's the same size system, but now you could get 25 kilowatts out of it instead of 15. So that was more of just kind of keeping pace with where technology's at. This is for backyard, ground-mounted systems, not roof systems. So those were the 2 areas we were really working on.
And I was wondering, did your committee also have a hand in the bill about regulating smartphones in schools, or is that another committee?
That was another committee, but I'm a big proponent of that, and we should mention that because that is part of a miscellaneous ed bill which has been held up as part of the big education reform package, in case, as I understand it, if pieces of the education reform package, if the big thing doesn't go through and they want to take pieces of it that they like and put it on this miscellaneous bill, and then we pass the miscellaneous bill, that's one way to get things going if we don't get the whole full reform package. So that's being held out, and I'm really hoping that we vote that out on the 16th, because I think it's a great bill. The data on keeping phones out of schools is pretty overwhelming in terms of mental health and making it easier for teachers and administrators, and making kids socialize and actually talk to each other. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty.
Oh my God, back to the 50s, huh?
Yeah, it's so I'm really hoping we get that across the finish line.
Yeah.
It's interesting how many students are in favor of it.
Yeah, I know. I guess I would have thought a lot of the pushback that I heard anyway would have come from students, but it's not the case at all,
Yeah.
as far as I can tell anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, the towns that have already done it, the schools that have already done it, are almost overwhelmingly in favor of it. There's a number of them have already done it, and it's take a week or 2 to get used to it, but everyone comes around, and so.
Yeah, well, there certainly seems to be a lot of consensus around the fact that we kind of got to a point where time to put them in the backpack and leave them there for the day, and they're going to be there at 3 o'clock or whenever you go home. So
Right.
it's not like it's going away forever. Well, I guess those were the main things. I guess the only other point I was half thinking maybe we could touch on real quick before we have to run. You guys passed the big bill, the budget, but Vermont gets a lot of its money from the federal government, right? 30% or more, I think I saw.
36.
Are there any concerns that bill will need to be looked at again if some anticipated money doesn't come along?
As you pointed out, and we talked about earlier, we haven't actually finished our session. This time was set aside in case we needed to go back to override a veto, and it's not going to be a veto session. Although I suppose if there were a veto, we could try and override it, but
Or sustain it.
or sustain it. Yeah. The key thing usually is for the budget, and the budget's already been signed, so there wouldn't really be anything, I think, that fell into that category. But there's in the budget, there's language that says if certain things happen, if federally, then the legislature can reconvene. And those are not good things. Those are certain bad things that might happen. And I think from what I understand, the budget bill that passed the House would trigger some of those things. So big cuts to Medicaid, the SNAP program, which we all used to know as food stamps, and 3 Squares Vermont is now, I think, another way that we think about it. There are big cuts proposed in that bill, and that would have a large effect on how Vermont administers the program and what benefits are available to people. So those could, if that passed, and I don't know what federally, whether the Senate is going to go along with it. Sounds like maybe they're not, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot at stake. There's all the Medicaid funding to get to that 36% Medicaid funding, transportation funding, school funding, education funding, and then other programs here and there, some of which have already been cut. We've been hearing about, almost immediately in January, there was a elimination of the program that was installing EV chargers. And then there were some farm food security programs that were cut in March. And, and then that's just within the federal government. And then, of course, there's other things separate, within the state government, rather. But then there's other cuts to the private sector that have had an effect on Vermonters that doesn't necessarily go through the budget.
So stay tuned, huh? To be continued. So, but the last question, I guess I'll direct to both Sandy and Chris. Your first year in the state legislature. What was it like? Must have been. Was it exciting? Was it fun? Was it too many late nights?
You want to go first?
I think it was fun. It was exciting. It was a great learning curve, and I completely enjoyed it. And I had my first personal attack from VPIRG on Friday, so I guess I'm doing something right because they got my name and they're threatened. But yeah, so no, it's going good. It had long nights. If there was one thing I would change, it would be a little more structure and time wasted. Like we need to get to work and get into committee and get some stuff done, and not the last couple of days was crazy. Like hurry up and wait. You go in session for 10-15 minutes and you wait for 2 hours. And you go back for 10-15 minutes and you wait for another couple of hours. So that kind of thing. And I think in the beginning of the session, maybe because it was a new biennium just a lot of wasted time in the beginning of the session. Like we should have gotten to work a lot quicker. But other than that, it's been a great. I'm in a committee where I feel I need to be, dealing with election law and municipal government and military affairs. So yeah, I'm really enjoying my committee. So.
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of that. It was a huge learning curve. It's not like running your own business. I think business people tend to be the most frustrated going up there and adapting to that environment. It's interesting to see how concentrated the power is in the building. That was a little frustrating at a certain point. But a lot of good people up there, and I think almost universally across all parties, people are there because they care about Vermont and they want to do right by their constituents. And we of course disagree on how that happens, but it's gratifying for me to be in a group of people that all want to do right for Vermonters and work hard and are pretty articulate, and so there's a lot of good work that gets done up there. It is an imperfect system, as we're seeing, but we haven't come up with a better one yet. So I'm glad to be a part of it.
All right.
And I think the camaraderie is amazing.
Yeah.
Even though you might be on different sides of the political spectrum or whatever, but we're all friends at the end of the day, and have a lot of great times together.
Sounds like you should
After
send a
hours.
tutorial down to Washington or something. They need some help. Well, all right, we'll leave it there for now, and I'm sure maybe there'll be an opportunity to have you all come back at some point. If not in the next couple of weeks, maybe sometime later this year. But meanwhile, we'll leave it there. And again, I want to thank Dave Durfee, who is the representative from Shaftesbury, part of Sunderland, and Glastonbury. Sandy Pinsonault, the representative from Dorset, Mount Tabor, Danby, Peru, and Landgrove. And Chris Morrow, who is the representative from Windhall, Andover, Londonderry, and Weston.
Very good.
That's harder than it looks.
Well done.
Okay. Anyway, and thanks to all of you who have been with us today. I hope you found the program interesting, and thank you for sharing part of your day with us. In the meanwhile, we'll see you the next time. Take care.